can't be mad with their kids if they say, if they're speaking theology, reminding them of their baptism.
Okay, baptism.
That is true. There might be some payback of. All right. So because it is 2016, I'm going to get out my high-tech visual device here. All right. Leave that right. All right. For those of you under the age of 16, that's paper. All right. So I have had the privilege, since coming here to St. Peter's Lutheran, to lead 2 communion education classes. And each time, we have a real simple format for that, all right? We begin by sharing a meal. We eat together. We talk about kind of, people we eat with, why we eat together as a community. And then we read and discuss the story of the Last Supper out of the Bible. And then we come in here and we practice. We practice what we do, we practice what we say, all of those things, and we talk about why we do the things we do. And at every communion class, I begin by drawing a picture. I say that it's a picture that sums up the entire meaning of communion, maybe even the entire story of the Bible, in one picture. Does anybody remember what I draw? Does anybody remember what I draw? And anybody can answer because I've used it in communion class, I've used it in confirmation class, and I've used it in adult education as well, Sunday school. Hold on just a second. It's going to take me a minute to draw. It's complicated. I know, pretty amazing. Many years ago, I brought in a pastor to talk to the camp staff, the college-age counselors who were about ready to embark on summer camp. And I asked him to teach us about what it means to be a Christian who also happens to be Lutheran. And Pastor Charlie drew this picture and simply said, God comes down. The entire story of the Bible is that God comes down to us. And now, with us, as human beings, I don't know about anybody else, but we are often tempted to try and flip this, right? And we try to say, and make it a story about us rather than a story about God. Do you believe enough to make it up to God? Do you have enough faith to go to heaven? Did you do enough good works to deserve God's help and favor? Don't get me wrong. Believing in God, having a strong faith, doing good deeds, all of these things are good things. They just aren't how God chooses to act in the Bible or in our world. We can't earn God's love or favor. We can't do it because we are already beloved by God. We are already fully favorable to our God. For God so loved the world that he sent his only Son. God's story always begins in love. And it always involves God coming down to be with us in the midst of joys and sorrows, in the midst of our good days and our bad days, our successes and our failures. And perhaps this is why I love our gospel story from Luke this morning so much. It's a story of God coming down to be with us and help us, simply because we are his beloved. Walk through it with me here. So break out your gospel lesson. I'm going to make you work a little bit. So you're allowed to cheat. You can look at it. So immediately before this, Jesus has just gotten done healing the centurion's sick slave that we heard about last week, and now is walking into a town with his disciples. And I think it's interesting that it says he's walking in with a large crowd. And I can only imagine that it's a loud and joyful and maybe even a little rowdy crowd. You know, Jesus has been doing miracles. He's been healing people. He's been casting out demons. People who are with him believe that they are with and following the Messiah. And so this energized, pumped up crowd runs into another crowd. Another crowd that's coming out of the same town. A crowd with very different emotions. And what do Jesus' disciples and his entourage run into? What do they run into? A funeral procession. And it's not just any funeral, right? It's the funeral for a mother's only son. And she was also a widow. Not only had she lost her husband, but now her only son. And we remember that this is important back then because males were the only people who earned money. Males were the only that owned property. So there was no Social Security. There was no Medicare. There was no other source of help. Back then, if your husband died, your sons were your safety net. Your only safety net. And the grief is raw with the funeral procession. Jewish customs dictated that the body had to be buried within 24 hours of death. So this woman had just lost her son. He had just died. And as you look at your gospel lesson, why is Jesus moved to action? Why is he moved? It says two things. She was crying, and how does he notice that she's crying? He sees her. He sees her. The first thing it says is that Jesus notices her. Jesus notices someone hurting. And then what does Jesus have? Compassion. It's amazing to me that this widow never approaches Jesus. She actually never says one word to Jesus. Jesus sees a woman in need and acts out of love for her. God comes down to us. There is no mention of her faith. There's no mention of her morals. God acts not because of who she is. God acts because who God is. God's love, forgiveness, and salvation are free gifts. We cannot believe enough. We cannot have enough faith. We can't do enough good deeds to earn God's love. We cannot because God already loves each of us madly and completely. God saw you at your birth and was totally taken and smitten with you like a grandparent with their grandchild. Cracks me up from time to time when I talk to grandparents, you know, and I ask them how their grandchild is, and they say, perfect. God claims us through our baptisms and renews us each week through the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ on our communion table. Free gifts, freely given by a God who sees us and loves us. When we are forgiven, and that's what's happening when we come up here and receive Holy Communion, we are restored to be the people who we were created to be. No longer clinging to our sin and shame. No longer hanging on to our worst moments. God has come down to earth to remind each of us who we truly are. So what happens after the dead man is raised and given back to his mother? And I don't mean 16 and 17. I want you to think further. I'm talking after. The next day. The next month. In a year. Can the woman and son ever go back to how they were before Jesus' crowd, full of life, runs into their crowd full of death. The mother is changed. The son is changed. Their crowd is changed. God comes down and nothing will ever be the same again. So too, you, when you come up for communion, know that you are touching and being transformed by the living God. Yes, we all have a past, but it's a forgiven past. So at this point, what is our response? When we've been forgiven, God comes down, God gives us grace, God gives us love, God gives us mercy, and is our response then to give back to God? Absolutely not. By no means. It's the same thing as flipping it again. What can we possibly give to the almighty creator of heaven and earth that God does not already have? I wonder if instead we are called to live into the image of our God and come down. What if we as individuals, what if we as churches are called to become conduits for God's grace, mercy, and help to those in the world who need us the most? What if it would look, instead of like this, what if we get rid of this? What if we start doing this? How many of us are in here? Maybe 100 this Sunday? 100 arrows going out, spreading God's grace. God's grace coming down from God, given on to others. I like to believe that this is what happened with the widow and her resurrected son. I like to imagine that they went home and they celebrated, and then they got together and they started looking around the community and said, you know what? Sally lost her husband and her son. Let's bring them into our house. Let's make them part of our family. Let's take care of them. I like to believe that this is what St. Peter's Lutheran Church does with God's grace that has been first given to all of us. This is why this very week, because of your generosity, because of Joe and Olga's generosity, checks over $17,000 were sent out all over our county, our country, and our world to serve people with disabilities, to help pets, to help prisoners, to help children, and many, many more. This is why 9 of us are going down to help people in need that we've never met and we may never meet again, to have a house to call their own, a safe place, a clean place. This is why we have 13 kids tonight from our outdoor leadership program that you all sponsored, that you all made dinners for, that you all volunteered with, to help 7th and 8th graders learn about leadership and get them involved in the outdoors. God's grace comes down, and we are sent out to share it. Thanks be to God, and amen.